The Arizona Territory stretched endless and unforgiving under the blood-red sunset of October 15, 1878, where the alkali flats caught the dying light like pools of molten copper. At 6:47 in the evening, 5-year-old Daisy Pike should have been safe at home in Willow Springs, but the violent storm 3 nights past had transformed the familiar path into a death trap of deceptive mud and hidden sinkholes. The quicksand seized her with the hungry embrace of a living thing, pulling her down past her tiny waist with wet, sucking sounds that seemed to echo from the bowels of hell itself. Each desperate struggle sent her deeper into the alkaline maw, the viscous substance squeezing around her chest like the cold fingers of death. Terror flooded her small body as her breath came in panicked gasps, the mud creeping steadily toward her chin. "Help me, I'm sinking. Please, somebody help me." Her voice cracked across the desolate landscape, high and desperate, as a bird's death cry swallowed almost immediately by the moaning wind that swept across the flats like the whispered prayers of the damned. From a rocky outcrop 400 yards distant, Hosa heard that piercing scream cut through the evening air like a knife blade through silk. The Apache warrior, 43 winters old with premature silver, threading through hair black as midnight, had been tracking wounded deer when the child's terror reached him on the desert wind. His weathered face marked by a thin scar running from temple to jaw earned in his final battle. As an army scout tightened with immediate recognition of mortal peril. By all rights, he should have turned away. Any rational man would have, especially an Apache in territory where his people were hunted like rabid wolves by men who collected scalps for bounty money. That child's father, Jasper Pike, owned the very Winchester rifle that had shattered Hosa's left thigh bone 8 months ago during a running gun battle, leaving him with a pronounced limp that now marked every step with remembered pain. Pike's hired killers had murdered Hosa's younger brother Nalnish in a dawn raid last winter, burning the family's wickai up to ash and scattering the survivors into the winter desert with nothing but terror and grief. The rancher had used that massacre to justify expanding his private militia and securing profitable government contracts worth thousands of dollars monthly. But Hosa carried within his scarred chest the iron discipline of 8 years as a United States Army scout. And those years had burned into his soul a code that transcended blood feuds and personal vengeance. Protect the innocent, especially children regardless of their heritage or the sins of their fathers. Stay very still, little one. Hosa's voice carried the absolute authority of command, cutting through her panic like sunlight through storm clouds. Fighting makes the mud hungry for more. Be calm and let me reach you. Daisy's cornflower blue eyes, wide with terror above the mud line that had reached her slender neck, fixed upon him with the desperate hope of the drowning. She had seen Apache warriors before, usually dead in wagon beds or chained outside the courthouse. But this one moved toward her with purpose, rather than away with fear. The quicksand stretched nearly 60 yards across its surface, deceptively solid, except where Daisy had broken through into the hungry darkness beneath. Hosa's keen scout's eyes rapidly assessed the deadly puzzle underground springs meeting alkaline surface deposits after the storm, creating a natural trap that had claimed countless animals over the centuries. He needed leverage weight distribution, and above all speed. The child was sinking steadily, perhaps 8 minutes before the mud reached her mouth. Stripping off his fringed buckskin vest to reveal a torso crossed with battle scars, he moved to a twisted willow at the bog's edge. The trunk was too slender for his weight, but its branches might serve. He snapped off a 6-foot section, testing its flexibility with hands that had learned to judge such things in desperate situations. His braided rawhide rope, 30 feet of carefully maintained lifeline, emerged from his belt. He secured one end around the most solid granite boulder available and tied the other around his waist with knots that would hold against the pull of death itself. At 7:02 p.m., as twilight deepened toward full darkness, rifle shots cracked across the flats like thunder. Get away from her, you red devil. Luther Price's voice carried pure hatred as he and two riders appeared at the bog's rim, their horses dancing nervously at water's edge. No Apache touches Pike's daughter and lives to boast of it. Bullets whined overhead and punched into the alkaline mud around Hosa, sending up geysers of stinking muck that spattered his back. Daisy's screams rose to a pitch that seemed to crack the desert air itself, her small body shaking with doubled terror as gunshots echoed across the wasteland. Stop your shooting, you fools! Hosa roared, raising one mud-caked hand while maintaining his grip on the lifeline. You'll kill the child with wild firing. But their horses, wise with ancient prey animal instinct, refused to enter the deadly bog. They reared and backed away from the treacherous surface, leaving the riders to shoot ineffectively from too great a distance, while Hosa continued his methodical crawl toward the trapped child. When he reached her at 7:09 p.m., Daisy was buried to her armpits, breathing in shallow gasps that spoke of a body surrendering to death. Without hesitation, her fingers dug into his shoulders with desperate strength, drawing blood through weathered skin. I have you now, Hosa whispered with gentle authority. Hold tight and trust me to bring you home. The quicksand released her inch by precious inch as he pulled steadily while backing toward solid ground. His wounded thighs screamed with agony, sending flames up his spine, but he forced himself through the slow, methodical retreat. More shots rang out, one bullet sparking off the granite anchor rock and another punching through water near Daisy's head. He reached the bog's muddy shore just as his strength began to fail, rolling Daisy into a shallow depression among cattail reeds as bullets continued searching for them through gathering dusk. Price fired 3 more shots into the reeds before darkness and his companion's nervousness forced retreat. Why did they shoot at you? Daisy whispered, her voice barely audible above wind that set reeds whispering like spirits. Because they see only what they expect to see, little sister. Hosa replied using the Apache term of endearment his own daughter had loved. They look at my skin and see enemy instead of looking at actions and seeing friend. Unable to return her to Pike directly, the man would shoot him on sight. Hosa faced an impossible choice. He couldn't abandon her in the desert, yet her presence brought mortal danger. He decided to trust Ruth Yates, the town's midwife, carrying the mud-covered child through desert night, to leave her at the clinic door. Ruth found them there at 11:43 p.m. Daisy sleeping peacefully in Hosa's arms despite her ordeal. The woman studied the Apache warrior, seeing not the savage of territorial stories, but a man worn by loss, yet capable of gentleness toward a child who had every reason to fear him. They'll search everywhere for her, Ruth warned. Pike's men have been hunting since sunset. I understand the danger, Hosa replied. But she needed help, and you were her only hope. As he prepared to leave, Daisy stirred and looked up with sleepy eyes. Are you going away? Your father will want you home, little sister. But what if the bad mud comes back? What if I need saving again? The question struck like a physical blow, awakening memories of his own daughter lost to reservation disease. Then call my name, and I will find a way to hear you, he promised, knowing it might cost everything he had left. Dawn broke gray on October 16th, when Pike stormed Ruth's clinic at 6:15 a.m. with 6 armed men. Sheriff Cal Ritter led the group, his star gleaming against a vest stretched over considerable bulk, while Luther Price and 4 hands blocked exits with practiced efficiency. Pike carried his silver-inlaid Smith & Wesson, openly pale eyes blazing with fury. His normally immaculate appearance was disheveled, uncombed hair, partially untucked shirt, suggesting a sleepless night of searching. Where is she? Pike demanded without preamble. Ruth stood protectively before the bed where Daisy lay, recovering from alkali poisoning, still weak from the previous night's ordeal. She's safe. The man who brought her said she fell into quicksand near the flats. He pulled her out and carried her to safety. That man was an Apache kidnapper, Pike snarled. A savage who nearly got my daughter killed. Papa. Daisy's small voice cut through adult tension as she sat up, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Pike's expression softened momentarily as he gathered his daughter, but his relief was tainted by calculation. Daisy, sweet girl, did that Apache harm you? No, Papa. He saved me good. I was sinking in the hungry mud, and he crawled like a snake to pull me free with his rope. Pike's face darkened at this account, contradicting his preferred narrative. You're confused, darling. Frightened minds sometimes remember things wrong. From shadows near the back door, Hosa stepped forward with fluid silence. He'd been waiting since before dawn, knowing Pike would come and hoping to speak before violence erupted. The child speaks truth. Hosa said quietly, hands visible and empty. Your men fired on us during the rescue. She would have drowned if I had fled to save myself. Pike's men drew weapons instantly, but Pike himself seemed more shocked than frightened. His pale eyes studied Hosa's face with growing recognition. You're the scout who broke confinement last winter, Pike said slowly. The one who tracked my men after that Dragoon Mountains business. Your men murdered my brother and 11 others. Hosa replied without emotion. Women and children who never raised weapons against anyone. My men defended this territory against hostile raiders. Pike lied smoothly. If your brother chose that association, he accepted the consequences. The confrontation was interrupted by Deputy Emmett Crow arriving on horseback, his young face tight with urgency. 23 years old, with his father's earnest eyes and stubborn chin. Emmett had been investigating another suspicious raid at Murphy's place when word reached him about the clinic standoff. Emmett dismounted and studied the scene, armed men surrounding a medical clinic, guns drawn on an unarmed Apache who stood protectively near a sick child. His methodical mind, inherited from his father, immediately began cataloging inconsistencies. Mr. Pike, Emmett said carefully, hand resting on his sidearm. Mind explaining why your men were shooting near a drowning child last night? Mrs. Henderson saw muzzle flashes from the direction of the Alkali Flats around 7 o'clock. Pike's face flushed, caught off guard by the direct challenge. My men were attempting rescue operations. The Apache interfered with legitimate efforts to save my daughter. Interfered. Emmett's voice carried skeptical edge that made Pike's jaw tighten. By pulling her from Quicksand while bullets flew around her head. Seems to me anyone truly trying to save a child would cease fire the moment they saw someone reaching her. The logic was unassailable, and Pike knew it. His pale eyes darted between Emmett and the townspeople who'd gathered at the windows, drawn by commotion. For the first time in years, Jasper Pike found himself publicly questioned by someone who couldn't be easily intimidated or bought. You weren't there, Deputy, Pike said, but uncertainty crept into his voice. Situations in the field require split-second decisions. Sometimes civilian observers misunderstand tactical necessities. Tactical necessities. Emmett pressed, sensing weakness. What tactical necessity required continued shooting at a man pulling your daughter from certain death? The question hung in morning air, like smoke from extinguished fire. Pike's men shifted, uncomfortably aware that their employer's version of events sounded increasingly hollow under scrutiny. Even Sheriff Ritter looked troubled by implications he'd been too intimidated to consider previously. The Apache is a dangerous fugitive, Pike said, finally falling back on fabricated authority. Wanted for multiple crimes, including horse theft and assault. My men acted appropriately given threat assessment. Then why? Daisy's clear voice piped up from Ruth's protective embrace. Why did he sing gentle songs to keep me calm while pulling me from hungry mud? Bad men don't sing lullabies, Papa. The child's innocent observation shattered Pike's careful mythology more effectively than any adult argument could have. Pike yanked her away from Ruth, roughly making her cry, But damage was done. Everyone had witnessed the exchange. Sheriff Ritter produced fabricated warrant papers claiming Hosa was wanted for stealing horses from the Martinez ranch. That the Martinez family had died of cholera 3 weeks earlier was conveniently ignored, though Emmett filed the detail away for future investigation. "You'll leave this territory immediately," Pike said with forced authority. "If seen again, you'll be shot as an escaped fugitive." As Pike's men prepared to escort Hosa away, Daisy slipped from her father's arms to hug the Apache's leg. "Thank you for saving me," she whispered. "I won't forget ever." Pike yanked her away roughly, but the damage was done. The public confrontation had revealed cracks in Pike's authority that Emmett intended to explore thoroughly. 3 days later, on October 19th, Deputy Emmett Crow knelt in muddy earth at the Murphy Ranch, studying evidence that confirmed his growing suspicions about Pike's operations. The Apache raid had followed Pike's usual pattern, convenient timing. Minimal property loss and peculiar details that didn't match genuine war party tactics. But this time, Emmett's methodical search revealed something Pike's men had overlooked in their hurried stage setting: a 4440 brass cartridge case lying half-buried near the burned barn. The casing gleamed dully in morning light, its head stamp clearly marking it as Winchester manufactures standard issue for civilian firearms, not the antiquated rifles typically carried by Apache warriors. Emmett pocketed the evidence with growing excitement. Apache war parties used a mixture of captured weapons, often decades old, with ammunition scavenged from multiple sources. Finding a fresh Winchester casing at a raid site suggested either remarkably well-supplied raiders or something far more sinister. He'd served as deputy for 18 months, long enough to recognize that genuine Apache attacks left different evidence patterns, different tracks, different shooting positions, different tactical approaches based on traditional warrior training. The Murphy raid showed none of these characteristics, instead displaying hallmarks of men familiar with white military tactics, trying to simulate Apache methods. The investigation deepened his conviction that Pike was manufacturing the very threats he claimed to combat, but proving it would require more than circumstantial evidence. He needed witnesses' documentation or direct confession from someone involved in the deception. That opportunity came sooner than expected. That evening, while Emmett processed his findings, Fritz Mueller started a drunken fight in the Silver Dollar Saloon that led to his arrest. During the booking search, Emmett discovered something that made his blood run cold: a pay chit from Pike's Copper Gulch mine dated 3 days earlier. "You've been working for Pike?" Emmett asked as he locked Fritz in jail. "What's it to you?" Fritz slurred, whiskey breath reeking. "Nothing, except Pike told everyone you were a dangerous drifter needing elimination." Fritz's bloodshot eyes focused as he processed this information. "Pike said that about me yesterday. Called you and your partner suspected horse thieves." The drifter's expression changed from confusion to anger. "That bastard. After everything we'd done for him." Emmett's pulse quickened. Here was the break he'd hoped for. "What kind of work?" Against better judgment, Emmett retrieved whiskey from the sheriff's desk and passed it through bars. Fritz took a long pull and wiped his mouth. "Your daddy was hauling supplies to mine." Fritz began. "Powder, mostly, plus equipment. Pike needed Apache raid look-alike, so he hired me and partner to dress like Indians and hit the wagon." Emmett's hands clenched as implications sank in. "You killed my father. Weren't supposed to happen that way," Fritz said quickly. "Pike told us rough him up, make it realistic, but don't hurt him serious. Your daddy fought harder than expected, grabbed for shotgun. You shot him in the back." "A partner did. I held horses. But Pike paid same and we kept quiet like he wanted." The revelation devastated Emmett completely. His father hadn't died defending travelers from savage raiders. He'd been murdered by hired actors working for the territory's most respected citizen. But there was more. Fritz's uncomfortable expression revealed additional secrets as Emmett pressed for details about other incidents. "Your daddy weren't the first, neither. Pike's been staging raids over a year now, blaming Apaches for everything." Even his own wife's death was supposed to be staged, but Price got nervous, kicked over lantern, whole thing went up with the lady still inside. The room spun as Emmett absorbed this final piece. Eleanor Pike had died because of her husband's greed, burned alive in fire meant to justify his schemes. Pike had used his wife's genuine death to fuel violence against innocent Apache families while positioning himself as grieving victim. What Pike didn't know was that his carefully constructed empire of lies had already begun unraveling in ways he couldn't control. Deputy Emmett Crow possessed something Pike had always underestimated: his father's methodical mind, and an absolute commitment to justice that wouldn't bend to political pressure or threats of violence. Thomas Crow had been Pike's business partner once, back when both men seemed committed to building civilization in the wilderness. They'd hauled freight together, shared dreams of prosperity, even planned to expand their operations into the territorial capital. But Thomas had been a man of principle, and when he discovered what Pike was really doing with those nighttime shipments and those carefully timed Apache raids, he'd tried to stop it. That attempt had cost him his life. That evening, as Emmett prepared fake prisoner transfer to county seat, he made detour that would change everything. Instead of taking main road as Pike expected, he rode toward cave system where Ruth had told him Hosa was hiding with Daisy, who'd fallen ill with delayed alkali poisoning. The journey took him through rugged country, following deer trails and ancient Apache paths few white men had seen. His horse picked carefully through rocky passages, guided by Ruth's directions, until he found them in natural chamber lit by small fire, casting dancing shadows on stone walls. Hosa stood guard with rifle ready while Ruth tended recovering Daisy. The Apache kept weapon trained on approaching sounds until recognizing Emmett's voice from darkness. "Nagar, I need to speak with both of you," Emmett announced, entering the sanctuary. Information that changes everything about Pike's operations. He quickly explained Fritz's confession and Pike's plan for prisoner elimination. As he spoke, he watched understanding dawn in Hosa's dark eyes. The Apache had suspected Pike's involvement, but now had concrete proof. "This man, Fritz," Hosa said thoughtfully. "He participated in killing your father." His partner pulled trigger, but Fritz was present. Emmett confirmed, voice tight with controlled emotion. "Both working directly for Pike. And Pike's wife died during false raid. According to Fritz, her death was accidental," Emmett explained. "Price was supposed to set small fire for authenticity, but accidentally caused inferno that killed her." Hosa absorbed information with stoic expression, marking his military service. But Emmett could see anger burning behind calm facade. Anger at senseless waste, innocent people blamed for uncommitted crimes, endless violence Pike created for material gain. From firelight, Daisy looked up with curious eyes, seeming older than 6 years. She didn't understand complex adult conversation, but sensed tension filling cave like smoke. "Why does everyone look scared?" she asked with direct honesty. Ruth knelt beside child, smoothing blonde hair. "Grown-up problems, sweetheart. Nothing for you to worry about now." But Daisy's presence reminded them what was truly at stake. Pike's schemes had claimed too many lives: Emmett's father, Hosa's brother, countless others whose names would never be recorded. "I have an idea," Emmett said slowly. "Dangerous and requiring precise coordination, but might be our only chance to expose Pike before he kills more innocents." The plan required enormous risks from all participants, but offered possibility of ending Pike's terror reign permanently. The strategy demanded careful timing, misdirection, and courage, separating heroes from mere survivors. But their scheme unraveled before they even reached Willow Springs. Pike had moved faster than anticipated, eliminating Fritz and seizing control of the situation with ruthless efficiency. When Emmett arrived at the jail, he found Sheriff Ritter waiting with nervous perspiration and conspicuously empty hands. "Where's the prisoner?" Emmett demanded. "Pike came by around 8 o'clock. Ritter stammered. "Had official transfer papers from Judge Morrison ordering immediate county transport." took Fritz personally for safe delivery. Emmett's heart sank as implications struck. Judge Morrison had been in Santa Fe for territorial legislature sessions the past month, making any papers bearing his signature obvious forgeries. But proving that required time they didn't possess. Pike had been preparing for this moment, anticipating opposition, and taking steps to eliminate threats before they could mature into genuine danger. By now, Fritz was either dead or imprisoned beyond any authority's reach. That evening, as storm clouds gathered overhead, promising the kind of tempest that could change everything, Pike made his final desperate gamble. Unable to locate Hosa, despite extensive searches, and knowing that Emmett was gathering evidence that could destroy him, Pike decided to force a confrontation on his own terms. He came for Daisy at 9:15 p.m., when Ruth was preparing evening medications in her clinic's back room. The sound of splintering wood announced his arrival as the front door burst inward under boots of armed men who moved with military precision through lamplight darkness. "Where is she?" Pike's voice carried cold authority as he stepped through doorway's silver-inlaid revolver gleaming like death promise. Behind him, Luther Price and 4 gunmen spread throughout clinic with weapons drawn covering exits and potential hiding places. Ruth emerged from back room with medical supplies in hand, stopping short when she saw intruders. "Jasper, what in God's name are you doing?" "This is medical facility. My daughter has been kidnapped and systematically corrupted by savage influences," Pike announced with theatrical volume intended for potential witnesses. "I'm here to reclaim what belongs to me. Daisy is sleeping upstairs, recovering from alkali poisoning," Ruth said, moving protectively toward staircase. "She's been sick for days." "Sick with Apache contamination," Pike replied with chilling coldness. "Stand aside, Mrs. Yates. Your assistance in this matter has been noted for future reference." But Ruth Yates had delivered babies through winter blizzards, and epidemic summers had stanched bleeding wounds when bullets flew and knives flashed. She'd faced down drunken husbands and diseased desperados without flinching. One corrupt rancher with delusions of authority didn't frighten women who'd spent 20 years serving others, regardless of personal danger. "You'll not take that child anywhere," Ruth said with quiet steel. "She's under medical care, and I'm legally responsible for her welfare." Pike's pale eyes glittered with malevolence. "Mrs. Yates, you're interfering with parental authority. That constitutes kidnapping under territorial law, and what you're doing constitutes child endangerment," Ruth shot back. "Daisy needs rest and proper care, not midnight rides through storm weather." Price gestured to 2 men who immediately moved toward staircase, but Ruth positioned herself squarely in their path. "You'll have to go through me first." The confrontation might have continued, but small voice from upstairs stairs settled matters with heartbreaking simplicity. "Mrs. Ruth, are there bad men downstairs?" Daisy appeared at stair landing in white nightgown blonde hair, tousled from sleep blue eyes, wide with fear, as she recognized her father's harsh voice. She clutched ragdoll against chest gift from Apache children before their families were scattered by Pike's false raids. "Papa," she said uncertainly, sensing tension crackling between adults like lightning before storms. Pike's expression softened briefly, but calculation quickly replaced paternal concern. "Come down here, darling. Papa's taking you somewhere safe, but I am safe," Daisy said, confusion evident in small voice. "Mrs. Ruth takes good care of me, and my Apache brother might come visit like he promised." The innocent reference to Hosa struck Pike like physical blow, confirming his worst fears about corruption's extent. His daughter genuinely cared for the Apache warrior, saw him as protector rather than enemy. Such contamination required immediate action before it spread beyond redemption. "Your Apache friend is dangerous criminal," Pike said, ascending stairs with measured steps. "He's been filling your head with savage lies." No. Daisy backed away from approaching figure, instinctively recognizing threat, despite their blood relationship. Hosa saved me from hungry mud. He sang gentle songs and told true stories. Pike reached landing and gathered child despite her struggles, binding her wrists with rope he'd brought for purpose. Her cries echoed through clinic as gag was forced between lips, reducing protests to muffled sobs. Ruth started upstairs to intervene, but Price's gun barrel against her spine stopped forward motion. "Wouldn't be wise, lady. Boss wants minimal complications tonight. Jasper, she's your own flesh and blood." Ruth pleaded as Pike carried bound child downstairs. "Whatever twisted justification you've created, she's innocent of adult sins. My daughter died when corrupted by Apache influence." Pike replied with chilling calm. "What I'm carrying is merely contaminated vessel requiring cleansing or disposal." The casual dismissal of his child's humanity revealed complete moral decay, consuming whatever decency might once have existed in Pike's character. The man who'd begun as simple profiteer had transformed into monster, willing to sacrifice anyone protecting his lies empire. Outside waited covered wagon with guards positioned around it, ready for night journey to isolated location, where screams wouldn't reach sympathetic ears. Pike loaded Daisy into wagon bed like cargo rather than precious daughter. He then turned attention back to Ruth, with predatory focus. "You'll deliver message to your Apache friend," Pike said with false reasonableness. "He has until sunrise to surrender voluntarily at Copper Gulch Mine. If he refuses, my daughter pays ultimate price for his cowardice." The ultimatum was diabolically clever. If Hosa surrendered, Pike could execute him as captured renegade, claiming he died resisting arrest. If Hosa refused sacrifice, Pike could murder the child and blame her death on Apache savagery while positioning himself as grieving victim. Either outcome served Pike's purposes by eliminating threats to his empire, while enhancing his reputation as civilization's defender against barbaric chaos. "You're completely mad," Ruth whispered, horror-struck by Pike's moral corruption depths. "Daisy is your own daughter." "My daughter died when corrupted by Apache influence," Pike repeated with genuine belief in twisted logic. "What's in that wagon is merely vessel requiring purification." As wagon rolled into stormy darkness with precious cargo, Ruth stood helpless in doorway, watching evil triumph through superior force and absolute ruthlessness. But she carried message that would summon Storm's own fury against wickedness that had gone unchallenged too long. Thunder crashed overhead as Ruth ran through dark streets toward cave system, where Hosa waited, knowing she carried either summons to heroic sacrifice or ingredients for miraculous rescue against impossible odds. The Copper Gulch mine sat atop a mesa overlooking the valley, its office buildings and equipment sheds arranged around central courtyard like frontier fortress. Pike had chosen the location, well-commanding view of approaches, limited access routes, and thick stone walls that could withstand sustained attack. But Hosa had spent 8 years as Army Scout, learning to use weather and terrain as weapons against superior forces. As the storm unleashed its full fury at 12:43 a.m. on October 20th, bringing sheets of driving rain and violent winds that transformed Arizona desert into treacherous labyrinth, he saw opportunity where others saw obstacle. Moving through darkness required skills honed through decades of survival in hostile territory. Hosa approached from north using arroyos carved by flash floods to mask approach route from sentries positioned along Mesa's rim. His wounded thigh sent flames up spine with each step, but he forced himself through pain barrier toward objective that would determine everything. The compound's defensive advantages became liabilities in the storm. Guards couldn't see approaching figures through rain curtains, couldn't hear movement over thunder crashes, couldn't maintain effective watch with lightning constantly destroying night vision. 200 yards from perimeter, Hosa encountered first-century nervous young cowboy sheltering behind equipment shed, rifle propped against wall, while he struggled to light cigarette with wet matches. The guard never heard Apache warriors approach through howling wind, never saw shadow emerge from storm, until leather cords slipped around throat with deadly precision. Hosa applied pressure with calculated force-cutting blood flow to brain, without crushing windpipe technique learned during military service for neutralizing enemies without unnecessary killing. The guard slumped unconscious within seconds alive, but incapacitated for hours. Dragging limp form deeper into shadow, Hosa appropriated guard's hat and rain slicker, creating disguise that might pass casual inspection in storm darkness. He also claimed Winchester rifle and ammunition belt evening odds slightly in coming confrontation. The second sentry proved more alert, positioned near main gate, where lamplight provided some visibility despite weather conditions. Hosa studied guard's movement pattern from concealment, noting regular patrol route between gateposts every 3 minutes. The timing provided narrow window for infiltration. When guard turned away for routine check of eastern approach, Hosa moved with fluid grace across exposed ground, reaching office building's rear wall, just as lightning illuminated landscape with blinding intensity. Thunder crash that followed masked sound of breaking glass as Apache warrior slipped through rear window into Pike's private domain. Meanwhile, Deputy Emmett Crow implemented diversion strategy designed to draw defenders away from central compound. Positioned on valley floor with 3 volunteers from town, honest men sickened by Pike's reign of terror, he created elaborate deception using mirrors, lanterns, and coordinated movement to simulate substantial force approaching from multiple directions. The volunteers were Mexican vaqueros whose families had suffered under Pike's expansion, plus old prospector named Jake Morrison, whose mining claims had been stolen through fabricated documentation. They understood risks involved, but welcomed opportunity to strike back against corruption that had poisoned their community. "You remember," Emmett whispered as they prepared final positioning. "We need to look like full war party converging on mine. Keep spread out, keep moving, make plenty of noise when lightning strikes." Jake Morrison chuckled grimly while adjusting mirror angle. "Been waiting months for a chance like this. Pike's boy's gonna think half territory's rising against him." The deception worked better than anticipated. From office windows, Pike watched what appeared to be coordinated assault developing from 3 directions simultaneously. Lantern light reflected off mirrors created impression of dozens of riders, while strategic positioning suggested knowledge of compound layout that only inside information could provide. Boss Price called from observation post. "We got major problem developing. Looks like Apache war party plus white allies moving on multiple fronts." Pike studied approaching lights with growing alarm. If territorial authorities had finally moved against him, if federal marshals had arrived with Apache guides, his entire operation could collapse within hours. Every instinct screamed for immediate retreat, while escape routes remained open. But pride and desperation combined into deadly mixture that drove rational thought from consideration. Pike had invested too much in destroying Hosa, sacrificed too many principles, maintaining power, committed crimes too serious for forgiveness or clemency. Retreat meant eventual capture and certain execution. Distribute ammunition to all positions. Pike ordered with fanatic determination. "We make stand here. No surrender, no quarter given or expected." As guards moved to defensive positions along Mesa's rim, central compound became more lightly defended than it had been since Pike first fortified location. The strategy created exactly the opening Hosa needed for infiltration and rescue attempt. But one element nearly derailed entire operation. Young Mexican vaquero named Carlos Mendez, eager to prove courage after months of humiliation, advanced too aggressively toward enemy position. A patrol spotted his movement and opened fire, forcing desperate retreat that almost exposed entire deception. "Stay back, you fool," Emmett hissed as Carlos scrambled to safety behind Boulder. "One more mistake like that, and we're all dead men." The near discovery sent ripples of alarm through Pike's forces, increasing their vigilance, just as Hosa prepared final approach to office building. For several tense minutes, success balanced on knife edge between triumph and disaster. At 1:17 a.m., as thunder masked the sound of breaking glass, Hosa slipped through rear window of the mine office. The building's interior was lit by oil lamps, casting dancing shadows on walls lined with maps, mining equipment, and personal effects that spoke of Pike's obsession with control and accumulation. He found Daisy in Pike's private office tied to chair, but unharmed, her blue eyes wide with terror above gag that prevented cries for help. She recognized him immediately, hope flooding her small features as he moved swiftly to free her bonds. "Stay very quiet, little sister," Hosa whispered, cutting ropes with knife that had served him through countless dangerous missions. "We're going home, but must be silent as hunting cats." But Pike had anticipated rescue attempt and prepared accordingly. As Hosa lifted Daisy in his arms, preparing to retrace exit route, lamps suddenly blazed throughout the building as hidden guards emerged from concealment. "Well, welcome to my mine, Apache." Pike's voice carried cold satisfaction as he stepped into doorway, with silver-inlaid revolver trained on intruders. "I've been waiting for this moment since winter." 6 armed men surrounded them with weapons drawn, cutting off every escape route. Pike had used Daisy as bait in trap designed to eliminate his most dangerous enemy once and for all. "Let the child go," Hosa said quietly, positioning himself between Daisy and Pike's gun. "Your quarrel is with me alone. My quarrel is with every Apache who refuses to accept civilized authority." Pike replied with fanatic's gleaming eyes. "You represent chaos, savagery, everything decent people must eliminate to build proper society." "Papa." Daisy's small voice cut through adult hatred as she looked between men with growing confusion. "Why are you pointing gun at my friend?" Pike's face twisted with something resembling pain. "He's not your friend, darling. He's enemy of everything good and righteous. He killed your mother, destroyed our family, brought nothing but death to this valley." "No." Daisy struggled in Hosa's arms, her child's sense of justice outraged by lies. "He saved me from hungry mud. He was kind when bullets were flying." The child's testimony struck Pike like physical blow, shattering carefully constructed mythology he'd built around his criminal activities. His pale eyes blazed with fury at being contradicted by his own daughter and the one person whose love he'd thought guaranteed regardless of his actions. "Like you've been corrupted by savage influence," Pike said with chilling coldness. "Contaminated beyond redemption. Perhaps death would be mercy for both of you." But as Pike raised weapon to firing position, Emmett Crow burst through front door with Winchester rifle leveled at the rancher's back. "Drop your gun, Pike, it's over." The young deputy had successfully infiltrated compound during confusion of simulated attack, using distraction techniques Hosa had taught him to reach building undetected. Behind him came Ruth Yates and 3 federal marshals who'd arrived on evening train, summoned by telegraph messages describing Pike's criminal conspiracy. "Deputy Crow," Pike said without turning gun, still trained on hostages. "How convenient. Now I can eliminate all my enemies simultaneously. The federal government knows everything," Emmett announced with growing confidence. "Fritz talked before you killed him. We have written confessions, physical evidence, witness testimony. Your empire is finished." Pike's laugh carried hysteria of cornered animal facing inevitable doom. "Federal government. They funded my operations, paid me thousands for security services based on Apache threat I created. They're as guilty as anyone." The admission confirmed what they'd suspected. Pike's corruption reached beyond territorial boundaries into Washington offices where profit mattered more than justice. But it also revealed his complete detachment from reality. His inability to accept responsibility for choices that had destroyed countless lives. "Surrender now, and you might live to see trial," Emmett offered, though his voice suggested little hope for peaceful resolution. Surrender. Pike's voice rose to pitch, suggesting complete madness. I built this territory from nothing. Created jobs, brought civilization, defended decent people against savage chaos. I deserve gratitude, not persecution. In that moment, Pike's carefully maintained facade finally crumbled completely. The respectable businessman, the grieving widower, the defender of civilization, all revealed as masks, concealing monster, willing to sacrifice anyone protecting his lies empire. As he swung gun toward Emmett, preparing to eliminate threat to his delusions, Hosa acted with lightning reflexes that had preserved his life through countless betrayals. Still holding Daisy with one arm, he drew concealed knife and hurled it with deadly accuracy across the room. The blade took Pike's center chest, spinning him backward with arms spread like broken scarecrow. His revolver discharged into ceiling, bringing down shower of plaster and wood splinters, then clattered across floor as life fled his body through rapidly spreading crimson pool. In sudden silence following gunshot echo, Daisy looked down at her father's still form with expression combining grief, confusion, and relief that childhood shouldn't have to bear. "Is Papa sleeping?" she whispered against Hosa's shoulder. "Yes, little sister." Hosa replied gently. "He's sleeping now, and the bad dreams are finished." Pike's death ended his reign of terror, but it also began a healing process that would transform Willow Springs from place of fear into community of hope. Federal investigators arrived within days, uncovering evidence of corruption reaching from territorial offices to Washington departments, exposing network of officials who'd profited from manufactured conflicts between settlers and native peoples. Sheriff Ritter and dozen conspirators were arrested, charged with murder fraud and conspiracy against federal authority. The trials made national headlines, sparking congressional investigations into Indian affairs and military contracting that would eventually lead to significant reforms. Emmett was appointed sheriff by territorial governor, beginning tenure marked by fairness and absolute integrity that restored community faith in law enforcement. His first official act was issuing full pardon to Hosa, clearing his name of all charges and recognizing his service in exposing Pike's criminal enterprise. Ruth formally adopted Daisy, providing stable home environment where child could heal from trauma while learning to integrate Apache and Anglo cultures that had shaped her rescue and recovery. The arrangement suited everyone involved. Ruth gained daughters she'd always wanted. Daisy received mother figure, combining medical knowledge with infinite patience. And Hosa remained close enough to continue relationship that meant everything to both of them. The mine closed permanently after investigation revealed unsafe conditions and fraudulent assaying that had bilked investors of thousands. The land was returned to Apache bands through federal settlement, though most families were too scattered or traumatized to immediately resume traditional ways of life. Exactly 1 year after Daisy's rescue from Quicksand, Willow Springs celebrated Founders Day, with festival marking not Pike's arrival, but community's rebirth under honest leadership. The celebration occurred on October 15, 1879, beneath autumn's sky painted gold and crimson by setting sun that blessed rather than threatened the desert landscape. Main Street bustled with activity as townspeople prepared for evening festivities. Booths lined boardwalks, selling everything from Mexican pottery to Apache beadwork, representing cultural integration that Pike's divisive policies had nearly destroyed. Children of all backgrounds played together in dusty roads, while adults conducted business with mutual respect rather than suspicious hostility. At Morrison's general store, Hosa examined saddle leather with practiced hands, while 7-year-old Daisy selected penny candy from glass jars arranged behind polished counter. Their interaction drew curious glances, but no hostile stares. The community had learned to judge people by character rather than skin color. This bridal work shows real craftsmanship. Hosa told store owner Jake Morrison, running weathered fingers along intricate stitching. "Your Mexican supplier understands proper technique." Morrison beamed with pride at professional assessment. Carlos Mendez learned from his grandfather, who worked leather for Spanish dons. Quality work deserves quality payment, I always say. The conversation was interrupted by Daisy's delighted squeal as she discovered new shipment of books from back east. Her appetite for reading had amazed both Ruth and Hosa, who encouraged education while ensuring she didn't lose connection to Apache oral traditions that preserved wisdom through storytelling rather than written words. Look, stories about children who solve mysteries and help grown-ups. Daisy announced, clutching slim volumes against chest. Can we buy them, please? Educational materials are always worthwhile investment. Hosa replied solemnly, though his dark eyes danced with amusement at her enthusiasm. Mrs. Ruth says reading exercises mind like running exercises body. From doorway, Sheriff Emmett Crow watched interaction with satisfaction that came from seeing justice produce positive results. At 24, he'd grown into role with confidence earned through honest service and community support. His badge carried respect rather than fear, symbol of protection rather than oppression. Afternoon, folks. Emmett said, entering store with friendly nod to customers browsing merchandise. Jake, that new shipment from Tucson arrive yet? This morning's freight brought everything on your list. Morrison replied, producing wrapped package from behind counter. Federal Marshal supplies, plus those law books you ordered from Denver. Emmett accepted package with thanks, noting how natural exchange seemed compared to atmosphere of suspicion that had poisoned community during Pike's reign. People conducted business, openly trusted law enforcement, planned futures without constant fear of manufactured violence. Any word on Apache land settlement negotiations? Morrison asked, genuine concern evident in weathered features. Progress continues. Emmett replied diplomatically. Federal commissioners are working with tribal representatives to establish boundaries that respect traditional use while accommodating territorial development. Should have resolution within months. The delicate process required patience from all parties, but recent events had demonstrated benefits of cooperation over conflict. Apache bands slowly returned to ancestral areas under federal protection, while territorial authorities focused on legitimate development rather than manufactured crises designed to justify military contracts. As afternoon shadows lengthened toward evening, Daisy completed her purchases and joined Hosa for walk to cemetery overlooking valley. Their weekly visits to Eleanor Pike's grave had become ritual of remembrance and forgiveness, opportunity for child to process complex emotions surrounding family tragedy. They found Ruth waiting beside freshly tended headstone medical bag in hand after delivering Murphy family's third child. At 42, she'd discovered purpose and family that earlier life, as unmarried midwife, had never provided. Her face glowed with contentment as she watched chosen daughter and Apache guardian sharing stories beneath gathering stars. How are my favorite people? Ruth called, settling beside them on blankets spread over grass, growing green from recent rains. She carved. Hosa was telling about traditional Apache methods for training horses. Daisy reported snuggling between her protectors, and about how different tribes developed different techniques based on terrain and climate. Ruth smiled at educational content of their conversations, appreciating how Hosa shared cultural knowledge while encouraging Daisy's natural curiosity about world beyond immediate experience. The combination of Apache wisdom and Anglo schooling was creating remarkably well-rounded child. Speaking of learning, Ruth said, producing letter from medical bag. I received interesting correspondence from territorial capital today. She handed envelope to Hosa, whose expression grew thoughtful as he read official document inside. Apache Tribal Council wants me to serve as liaison between reservation families and territorial government, he explained. Help negotiate land settlements, educational programs, medical services. That sounds important, Daisy said, though her voice carried worry about implications. Would you have to go away? Main office would be here in Willow Springs. Hosa replied, understanding her fears. Traveling required, but this would remain home base where certain little sister could always find me. The position represented recognition of Hosa's unique qualifications, military experience, cultural knowledge, demonstrated integrity, and community respect that transcended racial boundaries. It also offered opportunity to help his people rebuild lives shattered by warfare disease and forced relocation while remaining close to family he'd chosen. As full darkness settled over cemetery and stars emerged like scattered diamonds against black velvet sky, they walked slowly back toward town, where lamplight glowed in windows of homes, where families gathered around dinner tables, sharing love and laughter that Pike's terror had nearly extinguished. At Ruth's house, large Victorian structure that had belonged to banker who'd fled when Pike's criminal network collapsed, they found Emmett waiting on front porch with coffee pot and serious expression suggesting official business. Federal marshals leaving tomorrow, he announced without preamble. Investigation complete, all arrests, made trials scheduled for spring session in Tucson. Any complications? Ruth asked, settling into rocking chair, while Daisy climbed into Hosa's lap. None significant. Pike's records were detailed enough to prosecute everyone involved, recover most stolen property, compensate families of victims. Territories appointing special prosecutor to ensure justice gets served properly. The news brought relief, tinged with awareness, that healing would take much longer than legal proceedings. Families had lost fathers, mothers, children to Pike's schemes. Apache bands remained scattered and suspicious despite official vindication. Trust, once shattered, required years to rebuild through consistent demonstration of good faith. What about the mine lands? Hosa asked, referring to territory at heart of original conflicts. Returning to Apache ownership through federal settlement. Emmett confirmed. Congress wants to avoid future conflicts by honoring legitimate land claims and providing resources for peaceful development. And the people who worked for Pike? The ones who didn't know about criminal activities? Most finding new employment. Some mining operations shutting down, but railroad constructions creating jobs and territorial governments hiring for expanded services. Honest work for honest wages, which is more than Pike ever offered. They talked until late evening about community challenges and opportunities, planning initiatives that would benefit everyone, regardless of cultural background. The conversation revealed how thoroughly their perspectives had evolved from seeing each other as representatives of opposing cultures to recognizing shared commitment to justice, compassion, and hope for a better future. When Daisy finally fell asleep in Hosa's arms, her face peaceful with security that no adult violence could shatter, Ruth carried her inside to bedroom. Decorated with both Apache and Anglo-cultural symbols, beadwork and quilts, dream catchers and family photographs, books in English and pictographs telling traditional stories. She's growing up to be a remarkable young woman, Ruth observed, tucking blankets around sleeping child. Strong enough to survive tragedy, wise enough to forgive, compassionate enough to bridge cultures that adults have kept separate too long. Children learn what adults teach. Hosa replied. We've tried teaching courage instead of fear, understanding instead of hatred, hope instead of despair. Do you think it will be enough? Ruth asked, voicing question that haunted everyone working to build better society from ruins of Pike's legacy. It must be enough, Hosa answered with quiet certainty. Because alternative is returning to cycle of violence and revenge that nearly destroyed everything good in this valley. As they stood watching Daisy sleep, 3 adults who'd found family through shared commitment to protecting innocence, they understood that healing would continue long after headlines faded and trials concluded. Real change happened, one relationship at a time, one act of kindness after another, one choice to build bridges instead of walls. Outside Ruth's house, Willow Springs settled into night, marked by peace that came from justice served rather than justice denied. Children slept safely in beds, while parents planned better futures. Former enemies worked together on projects benefiting entire community. Apache families began cautiously returning to ancestral lands, now protected by federal authority, committed to honoring legitimate claims. The transformation wasn't complete, might never be complete given human nature's complexity, but it was genuine, built on foundation of truth instead of lies. Cooperation instead of exploitation. Hope instead of fear. And in small bedroom overlooking valley, where so much suffering had been transformed into healing 7-year-old girl, dreamed of tomorrow when she would again ride with Apache warrior who'd saved her life and Anglo family who'd given her home, learning lessons about courage, forgiveness, and love that would guide her throughout life, stretching ahead like promise written in stars above desert that had witnessed both humanity's worst impulses and its finest aspirations. The blood and sand of Arizona territory had been washed clean by storm that brought justice instead of destruction, hope instead of despair, family instead of loneliness. And that perhaps was miracle enough for any story seeking happy ending in world that rarely provided such grace to those who needed it most. 5 years had passed since that storm-torn night, when justice finally came to Willow Springs and the town bore little resemblance to the fear-shrouded settlement that had cowered under Jasper Pike's reign. On a golden autumn morning in October 1884, 12-year-old Daisy Pike Yates stood at the edge of the same alkali flats where her story had begun. But now she faced them without terror, only with the quiet confidence of someone who had learned that even the most treacherous ground could be navigated with wisdom, courage, and the right companions. Beside her, Hosa's hair had gained more silver threads, and the lines around his eyes spoke of laughter shared as much as battles won. His official position as territorial Apache liaison had brought him respect throughout the Southwest, but his greatest pride remained the young woman who called him brother, and had grown into everything he'd hoped for during those desperate nights when her survival seemed impossible. "Tell me again why you chose this place for the ceremony," Ruth said, approaching across the hardpan with careful steps. At 47, she carried herself with the dignified bearing of someone who had found her life's true calling. The Willow Springs hospital she'd founded bore her name, and medical students traveled from as far as San Francisco to learn her techniques for treating alkali poisoning and desert injuries. "Because this is where it all began," Daisy replied, her voice carrying the thoughtful cadence that marked her as someone wise beyond her years. "Where Hosa chose to save an enemy's child instead of seeking revenge. Where forgiveness first defeated hatred." The occasion was the dedication of the Southwest Territory Peace Memorial, a modest stone monument that would mark the spot where an Apache warrior's act of mercy had ultimately transformed an entire community. But more than that, it represented something Daisy had spent months planning, a public acknowledgement of the man who had given her life twice once by pulling her from quicksand, and again by teaching her that identity came not from the color of one's skin or the sins of one's fathers, but from the choices one made when tested by adversity. Sheriff Emmett Crow, now 29 and widely respected throughout the territory, supervised the final placement of the memorial stone. His own journey from suspicious deputy to trusted lawman had made him a symbol of how justice could triumph when good people refused to accept corruption as inevitable. Beside him worked Carlos Mendez, the former vaquero, who now served as deputy and had become one of Emmett's most trusted allies. "The inscription looks perfect," Emmett called out, stepping back to admire the carved words that would tell future generations about the day courage conquered fear. "On this ground, October 15th, 1878, an act of mercy changed the course of hatred. Here stood proof that we are not bound by the prejudices of our past, but freed by the compassion we choose for our future." The gathering crowd represented every segment of Willow Springs' transformed society. Apache families who had returned to their ancestral lands mingled freely with Mexican ranchers, Anglo merchants, and the mixed heritage children who played together without the racial barriers that had once seemed insurmountable. Old Jake Morrison stood beside Maria Santos, the teacher whose school now educated children in 3 languages. Dr. James Fletcher, the physician who had come from Boston to work with Ruth, discussed medical techniques with an Apache medicine woman whose knowledge of desert healing had proven invaluable. But the most remarkable change was visible in the faces around them, no longer marked by the suspicion and fear that had poisoned Pike's era, but open with the kind of trust that came from shared struggles and mutual respect earned through years of honest dealing. As territorial officials and visiting dignitaries took their places for the dedication ceremony, Daisy found herself thinking not of the momentous occasion, but of smaller moments that had shaped her understanding of what it meant to be truly free. Like the morning when she'd awakened from nightmares about her father's death to find Hosa sitting beside her bed singing ancient Apache lullabies until the terror faded. Or the day Ruth had explained that loving someone didn't mean excusing their crimes, but that understanding their pain could help prevent others from following the same destructive path. She thought of the letters she'd received from Eastern schools offering scholarships and the decision she'd made to accept enrollment at the Women's Medical College in Philadelphia. Not to escape her desert home, but to gain knowledge she could bring back to serve both Apache and Anglo communities. Ruth had wept with pride when Daisy announced her intention to become a doctor, and Hosa had simply nodded with the satisfaction of someone who had always known his little sister would find ways to heal rather than harm. A ladies and gentlemen, called Territorial Governor Samuel Crawford, a lean man whose integrity had made him popular with voters tired of corruption. We gather today not merely to dedicate a monument, but to celebrate something far more precious proof that human beings can rise above the worst aspects of their nature to create something better for their children. The crowd quieted as Governor Crawford continued his remarks. But Daisy's attention drifted to a familiar figure standing slightly apart from the main gathering. Thomas Begay, a young Apache man about her own age, had ridden down from the reservation school where he was training to become a teacher. Their friendship had grown over the past 2 years, built on shared experiences of living between 2 worlds, and shaped by Hosa's gentle guidance about honoring both heritage and hope. Thomas caught her glance and smiled the kind of smile that spoke of understanding deeper than words could express. Like Daisy, he carried the complex legacy of violent times, but had chosen to build bridges rather than walls. Their correspondence about books, ideas, and dreams for the future had evolved into something that might in time become something more. But for now, it was enough to know that the next generation would have choices their parents could never have imagined. The memorial we dedicate today, Governor Crawford was saying, reminds us that heroism comes not from the ability to hate our enemies, but from the courage to see humanity in those we've been taught to fear. On this spot, an Apache warrior looked at a drowning child and saw not the daughter of his persecutor, but simply a life that needed saving. That single act of compassion ultimately saved an entire community from destroying itself through manufactured hatred. As applause filled the desert air, Daisy stepped forward to pull the cloth covering from the memorial stone. The simple granite marker bore not only the inscription about mercy conquering hatred, but also a carved image that had been her special request. A child's hand reaching upward, grasped by a strong adult hand, pulling it toward safety. No racial features were visible in the carving, making it clear that the memorial honored not specific ethnicities, but the universal human capacity for choosing kindness over cruelty. Hosa moved to stand beside her as photographers captured the moment for territorial newspapers. His weathered hand rested gently on her shoulder, the same hand that had pulled her from Quicksand 6 years earlier, that had taught her to braid rope and read animal tracks, that had dried her tears and steadied her through nightmares when the past seemed too heavy to bear. Are you proud? Daisy asked quietly, speaking in Apache as she often did when emotions ran too deep for English. I am proud of who you have become. Hosa replied in the same language. But mostly I am grateful that the spirits gave me chance to help you grow into woman who builds peace instead of war. Ruth joined them as the crowd began to disperse, some heading to the community feast that would continue the celebration, others lingering to examine the memorial more closely. The three of them stood together in comfortable silence, watching the sun climb higher over desert that no longer seemed hostile, but simply magnificent in its harsh beauty. I had letter from San Francisco yesterday, Ruth said eventually. Medical Journal wants to publish my paper on alkali poisoning treatment. They're calling it the Yates method and suggesting it be taught in medical schools nationwide. Your method saved dozens of lives, Daisy said with fierce pride, including mine more than once. The world needs to know about your work. Our work, Ruth corrected gently. You've been my research partner for 3 years now. Medical community should know that some of our best innovations came from teenager who combined book learning with practical experience. The acknowledgement meant more to Daisy than any scholarship or award could have. Working beside Ruth in the hospital had shown her that healing required not just technical knowledge, but the kind of compassion that saw each patient as someone's precious child, someone's beloved parent, someone worthy of every effort to restore them to health and happiness. Sheriff Emmett approached their small group, his face showing the satisfaction of someone who had overseen a successful public event without any of the violence that had once seemed inevitable whenever large crowds gathered in Willow Springs. To Daisy, he said formally, I have something that belongs to you. From his coat pocket, he withdrew a small object wrapped in soft leather, something she recognized immediately, despite not having seen it for years. It was her father's silver-inlaid Smith & Wesson, the weapon that had threatened so many innocent lives before taking Pike's own in that final confrontation at the mine. Federal authorities had held it as evidence through the trials, and Daisy had assumed it would remain locked away forever as a reminder of justice served. Why now? She asked, making no move to unwrap the gun. Because you're old enough to decide what should be done with it, Emmett replied. It's legally yours as Pike's heir, but the choice of what to do with it should be yours alone. Daisy hefted the wrapped weapon, feeling its weight and remembering not her father's crimes, but earlier times when he'd seemed like any other parent, teaching her to read, telling bedtime stories, carrying her on his shoulders through town streets that had once felt safe and familiar. Those memories didn't excuse his later actions, but they reminded her that evil was not inevitable, that good people could make terrible choices when fear and greed overcame wisdom and compassion. Without hesitation, she walked to a nearby boulder and unwrapped the revolver. The silver inlay caught sunlight like captured stars, still beautiful, despite its association with so much ugliness. She raised it high above her head, then brought it down against granite with all her strength. The gun shattered into pieces, metal fragments, wooden grip shards, silver decorations scattered across stone like deadly confetti. The symbolic destruction brought murmurs of approval from onlookers who understood the significance of choosing to break cycles of violence rather than perpetuate them. Some things, Daisy said clearly, her voice carrying across the desert, are too dangerous to preserve even as reminders. Better to destroy them completely than risk they might inspire future hatred. Thomas Begay stepped forward and began gathering the metal fragments, his intentions clear without need for explanation. Apache metalworkers would melt down the pieces and transform them into something useful, tools for farming ornaments, for celebration practical items that served life instead of death. As the crowd began moving toward town for the continuation of their celebration, Daisy lingered at the memorial with Hosa and Ruth. The alkali flats stretched endlessly in all directions, but they no longer seemed like barriers to overcome. Instead, they appeared as they truly were, part of a vast landscape that contained both beauty and danger, requiring wisdom to navigate, but offering profound rewards to those who learned its secrets. "I'll miss this place when I go east for school," Daisy said, already imagining the green hills and crowded cities that awaited her in Philadelphia. "But you'll return," Hosa said with quiet certainty. Desert gets into person's blood. Once you've learned to love this land, gentler places never satisfy completely. And we'll be here waiting. Ruth added, her voice warm with maternal affection. "This will always be your home, no matter how far your studies take you." The promise filled Daisy with contentment that had nothing to do with place and everything to do with family. The family formed not by blood or law, but by shared commitment to protecting each other and building something better than what they'd inherited. In a few months, she would board the train for Philadelphia, carrying with her lessons learned from an Apache warrior who had chosen mercy over revenge, and an Anglo woman who had chosen healing over profit. She would study medicine with the best teachers available, but she would never forget that the most important lessons about life and death, courage and compassion, had been learned here in the desert, where miracles sometimes emerged from the most unlikely circumstances. As they walked back toward Willow Springs, Daisy could see the town spread out below them, neat streets lined with thriving businesses, the hospital where Ruth saved lives daily, the school where children learned that their worth was measured by their character rather than their ancestry, the courthouse, where Emmett dispensed justice without regard for social status or racial background. It was a community transformed, proof that even the deepest wounds could heal when treated with patience, wisdom, and relentless commitment to doing better. The sun reached its zenith as they entered town limits, casting short shadows that would lengthen with the passage of hours, but never again darken the essential hope that had taken root in this small corner of the Arizona territory. Behind them, the memorial stone stood as permanent testimony to the truth that hatred could be conquered, that fear could be overcome, that the worst chapters of human history need not define the ones still being written. And in her heart, Daisy carried the certainty that whatever challenges lay ahead in her medical studies, in her eventual return to serve her community and the family she might someday raise, she would face them with the courage of an Apache warrior who had seen enemies as potential friends, the wisdom of a healer who had learned that broken things could be mended, and the hope of someone who had witnessed firsthand that even the most poisoned ground could bloom again when tended by hands committed to nurturing life rather than dealing death. The blood and sand of the Arizona territory had been washed clean, and what grew from that cleansing was more beautiful than anyone had dared to dream during those dark days when it seemed that hatred might triumph over everything good and decent in the human heart. The story that had begun with a child's cry for help in deadly quicksand had become something larger, a testament to the transformative power of choosing love over fear, understanding over prejudice, and hope over despair. And as Willow Springs prepared to celebrate another day of peace, hard-won and carefully preserved, the desert wind carried promises of tomorrow across landscapes that had learned finally to nurture life instead of consuming it.